Why is this event hardly mentioned at all in the rest of the Hebrew Bible? And in the Christian New Testament, you know how many times Christ brings up this idea? 0. Eve's never even mentioned by Christ. The great theologian Paul will only bring it up 3 or 4 times. In other words, if Christ is the one greater man who will restore us to the blissful seed, then why doesn't Christ speak more regularly about this story as being the explanation for why everything terrible has happened in the world? Milton knows this question. He's aware of this question. So for him, Milton is going to try to explain why it is fair to punish all of humankind because of one mistake. Of course, this will beg our question, do we think it's fair? Of course, finally, it's this question. The eating of the forbidden fruit. Should we define it as a mistake? Should we simply see it as, and by the way, the reading of it as a mistake is what most Jewish scholars of this text will say. This is why the word sin and the word fall don't even occur in the Genesis 3 account, because this is just one more example of how humans are human. They make mistakes all the time. Of course, in Christian theology, St. Augustine making it the most famous argument, no. This is the moment of all moments which warrants the beginning of the idea of Christian theology. And of course, the fall. But do we read it as a mistake, as a sin, as a fall, or do we read it as a victory? Remember, Genesis 3:22, now man has become as us, knowing good and evil. How do you read that moment? Of course, Milton, we understand, is conflicted himself in some ways about exactly how he's going to drive these points home. Well, let's not be afraid of any of these questions. Let's enjoy and be challenged by Milton's greatest poetry. And let's turn now to the poem itself and Book 9. And as we have been doing in the past lectures, let's go quickly now, first of all, to the argument. Let's just read the argument. Let's summarize Book 9 as to exactly what happens. And then let's get into the study of the language. The argument of Book 9. Satan, having compassed the earth with mediated guile, returns as a mist by night into paradise, enters into the serpent sleeping. Adam and Eve in the morning go forth to their labors, which Eve proposes to divide in several places, each laboring apart. Adam consents not, alleging the danger lest that enemy of whom they have been forewarned should attempt her found alone. Eve, loath to be thought not circumspect or firm enough, urges her going apart, the rather desirous to make trial of her strength. Eve, in other words, will argue, I can do it on my own. Adam at last yields. The serpent finds her alone, his subtle approach, first gazing, then speaking, with much flattery, extolling Eve above all other creatures. Eve, wondering to hear the serpent speak, asks how he attained to human speech and such understanding not till now. The serpent answers that by tasting of a certain tree in the garden he attained both to speech and reason, till then void of both. Eve requires him to bring her to that tree, and finds it to be the tree of knowledge forbidden. The serpent, now grown bolder, with many wiles and arguments, induces her at length to eat. She, pleased with the taste, deliberates a while whether to impart thereof to Adam or not, at last brings him of the fruit, relates what persuaded her to eat thereof. Adam, at first amazed, but perceiving her lost, resolves through vehemence of love, it will be love that drives Adam to eat of the forbidden fruit, to perish with her, and extenuating the trespass, eats also of the fruit, the effects thereof in them both. They seek to cover their nakedness, then fall to variance and accusation of one another. All right, let's go ahead and quickly now summarize Book 9. First, we've got the important invocation. We'll get to it in a moment. This will be the 4th time that Milton will play this game. Eve, part number 2, Eve will say to Adam, I think we should separate labor, divide labor, and I'm going to go off and work by myself. Adam will say, bad idea, she'll do it anyway. Of course, we're going to have the exchange between Satan and Eve. She ultimately will eat. She'll bring the fruit back to Adam. Adam will ultimately realize what's happened. He will eat at line 999. You'll remember in book 2 that death enters the world at line 666. Now Milton is going to bring us to line 999 of book 9 with Adam eating, and that will be the end of it all, right? And then finally we will have the fall, which will then lead to the fight. That's an interesting way to say it. And we'll finish this book 9 with a fight. Now, as I've said before, I really do wish that I could just read every line of this with you and then just work at it word by word, line by line. I just don't have the time. So let's do our best here. Let's go to the opening lines, and we'll work through it here as quickly as we can, taking our notes as we go. Opening lines, Invocation of the Muse, book 4. Here we go. No more of talk, where God or angel guest with man, as with his friend familiar used to sit indulgent and with him partake rule repast, permitting him the while venial discourse unblamed. Say it already. In other words, Milton is going to say it is time for the angels and gods to no longer be able to converse. Notice right away, Milton the linguist will begin with language, and he says a time is now about to happen where everything is about to change. I now must change those notes to tragic. Of course, the fact that he uses the word notes reminds us of the melodic musical quality, symphonic quality of this language. A great scholar, a number of them, have pointed out that reading Paradise Lost is kind of like watching one of those great organ players in St. Stephen's, for example, at Vienna or something like that, where the organ player plays on multiple things. I mean, he's got his hands doing one thing, and then you look down and the feet are doing something else. You've got all this different kind of stuff happening concurrently. As we've said, we're only looking at 3 ways this happens in the Paradise Lost, as epic, as theological, philosophic text, and political text. But now we're told that the notes are turning to tragic. In other words, we're going to play this game. We're going to play this game. Okay. Foul distrust and breach, disloyal on the part of man, revolt and disobedience on the part of heaven, now alienated. This will be an important word for us. Think about the ways in which we use that word alienated, for example, when we study 20th century and now 21st century poetics and literary texts, right? Now alienated, distant, and distaste. Notice the interesting play on words of distaste, tasting of the apple. Anger and just rebuke and judgment given, that brought into this world a world of woe, sin, and her shadow death and misery. Death's harbinger. Sad task, he says, for himself. In other words, I wish I didn't have to tell this story, but I do have to tell this story, because this is the story, as some have said, of all stories. Again, we'll ask, if this is the story of all stories, then why is this story not often mentioned in the religious text called the Bible? That is a fascinating question, and it's one that obviously Milton himself is aware of, which is why he's going to make such a big deal of it here. Well, he's going to write something more heroic than other epics. He is not writing, he says, about physical war, and in the invocation moves on to through line 47, but writing about spiritual war. And he will say it, I'm hoping that I'm not too old. He says it right before line 47. He says, me of these nor skill nor studious higher argument remains sufficient of itself to raise that name, unless an age too late, or cold climate, or years damp my intended wing depressed. Again, we're back to the angels and the soaring on the Ionian mountain, all of that. And much they may, if all be mine, not hers who brings it nightly to my ear. Think about this for your notes. Milton will begin Paradise Lost at roughly age 48. He will finish it at roughly age 59, and it's published at age 60. The concern for him is, am I going to have enough time to be able to get this thing finished? And at night when I rest, when I sleep, I hope that I'm given the information that I need to be able to tell the story well. Well, at line 54, we're back to the end of book 4. Gabriel, you'll remember, let Satan go because of the scales in the sky and all of that. And we're told that Satan has been gone now 8 days. He uses the Tigris to get back into Eden. And at line 81 as well, we have a reference even to Darien, and here for those of us that have studied Keats's Chapman's Homer, those final lines, then felt I like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his kin, or like Star Cortez when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent on a peak at Darien, and certainly probably Keats is playing the game of Darien just like Milton is at line 81. And finally now at line 99, Satan will see the world again, and we will see amazement on Satan when he sees Eden one more time. Now, Satan is aware that he is about to destroy everything amazing, right? And so he's going to go through an interesting kind of psychological rendering starting at line 99 with a soliloquy. He's speaking to himself, line 99. Oh, earth! How like to heaven, if not preferred more justly. The word just, of course, comes to mind, doesn't it? Both for our study of Paradise Lost as well as Plato's Republic. Seat worthier of gods is built with second thoughts, reforming what was old, for what God after better, worse would build. Terrestrial heaven, danced round by other heavens, and again we immediately think of book 7 here with the celebration of the earth, that shine yet bear their bright officious lamps, light above light, for thee alone, as seems in thee, concentrating all their precious beams of sacred influence. This reminds us again, now we're starting to think about already the influence of Shakespeare. The Tempest comes to mind, the last play we believe Shakespeare wrote in 1611, Brave New World. And then at line 118, Satan has worked himself now to finally decide, okay, I got to do this. But I, in none of these, find place or refuge. And the more I see pleasures about me, so much more I feel torment within me, as from the hateful siege of contraries. All good to me becomes bane, and in heaven much worse would be my state. But neither here seek I, nor in heaven to dwell, unless by mastering heaven's supreme. Not nor hope to be myself less miserable by what I seek, but others to make such as I, though they thereby worse to me redound. For only in destroying I find ease to my relentless thoughts. Can we pause for a moment and just point out, this reads a lot like Othello's Iago. In other words, I'm going to do this and it's going to redound negatively on me. I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway. Whoa. And him destroy God. Or one to what may work is utter loss. For whom all this was made, all this will soon follow, as to him linked in weal or woe. In woe then, that destruction wide may range. Woe, of course, reminds us of the invocation opening. To me shall be the glory soul among the infernal powers, in one day to have marred what he, Almighty, styled 6 nights and days continued making, and who knows how long before had been contriving. In other words, he says it. I will jack in one day what it took God 6 days to create. It's at this point that he decides, let's do it. He comes into Eden. Again, I wish I could read all these lines. I can't. He comes into Eden. He's looking, of course, for a shape that he can take. And ultimately, he takes the shape of the snake. Now, of course, let's point out that Satan, kind of like Proteus, has constantly been changing his shapes as he has gone through the process. Ultimately, he starts as kind of this amazing high type of character, but by the end, and here already we're thinking, right, of this type of fall, he's going to end up as a toad and now as a snake to get what he wants. At line 161, the serpent sleeping in whose mazy folds to hide me in the dark intent I bring. Oh, foul descent. Right. In other words, he recognizes it. Of course, think about Maisie and the ways in which Paradise Lost has been described as always with this language of Maisie, like a lamnin. And then also, of course, that the word amazing plays with the same notion of amazing. Right. At line 178, finally out loud, he says it, spite then with spite is best repaid. And we immediately think, of course, of Hamlet in those final lines of Act 1. Oh, cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right. The point I want to make here is just that our reading of the many different tragedies of Shakespeare can easily inform our study here of the great tragedy of Milton in Book 9. At line 187, he enters the serpent's mouth, and at line 192, we're told that he will hide amid the humid flowers. And it will be here that we will have then the beginning of the day of all days, right? Again, point out for yourself that the flowers are the symbol of all symbols as we get into this. Now, let's play the game. Lines 205, Eve is going to speak first to Adam, and she will begin by saying, Adam, well, maybe labor still to dress this garden, still to tend plant, herb, and flower, our pleasant task enjoin, but till more hands aid us until we have children. The work under our labor grows luxurious by restraint, that we by day lop overgrown or prune or prop or bind one night or two, with wanton growth derides, tending to wild. In other words, she says, you know what? The more work we do, it seems like nature grows faster than we can fix this place to groom it. And she says it at line 214, let us divide our labors then, right? And at line 218, she says, in yonder spring of roses intermixed with myrtle, I'm going to go until noon. Let's just remind ourselves that when Eve eats of the forbidden fruit and she returns back to Adam, Adam will have spent the morning making a garland out of roses for his Eve. And when he sees her carrying the fruit, he immediately knows what it is she's done, and he will let the garland slip from his hand, and the roses will immediately wither, and this will be the iconic moment to prove for Milton that Eden has fallen, that paradise is lost. So here we have the major setup. Eve says, you know what, I think I'm going to go work by myself. I don't need you around me for this morning. At line 226, mild answer Adam will give, soul Eve, associate soul, to me beyond compare, above all living things dear. I don't think it's a good idea, he says. Refreshment, whether food or talk between, food of the mind, or this sweet intercourse of looks and smiles, for smiles from reason flow to brute denied, and are of love the food. Love, not the lowest end of human life, for not to irksome toil, but to delight he meet us, and delight to reason join. Adam's response is interesting. Hey, there's a lot of work to be done, but we got time. And besides that, it's not just the work, it's the enjoyment of a good conversation while we're working. I don't want you to go. Right? Eve will come back, and she will say, at line 226 and following, Milton's answer is no. And we have, of course, the idea of the patriarchy itself. He will say it. He says, well thy thoughts employed, how we might best fulfill the work which here God hath assigned us, nor of me shall pass unpraised. For nothing lovelier can be found in woman than to study household good and good works in her husband to promote. Again, this instantiation of Milton and the Patriarchy as we saw it in our lecture on Book 4. At line 252, he continues when he says, for thou knowest what has been warned us. And of course the question is, does she know? Is she? For sure, what malicious foe, envying our happiness and of his own despairing, seeks to work us woe and shame by sly assault, and somewhere nigh at hand watches no doubt with greedy hope to find his wish and best advantage us asunder, hopeless to circumvent us, joined where each to other speedily aid might lend at need. It's simple. Satan won't attack us if we're together. So let's make sure, Adam here, of course, the protector, he will say, solitude sometimes is best society. However, he says, we're in danger. We've got to be careful. At line 265, we're told that perhaps no bliss enjoyed by us excites his envy more, or this or worse, leave not the faithful side that gave thee being, still shades thee and protects. In other words, you'll remember that Eve woke up in the shade. This was, of course, foreshadowing already. he says it, the wife, where danger or dishonor lurks, safest and seemliest by her husband stays, who guards her, or with her the worst endures. In other words, Adam says, it's my job to take care of you. You're going nowhere. At 273, Eve responds by saying, I can handle it. She even says it. She says, I learned from the parting angel, Raphael. I overheard as in a shady nook. We're back to this notion of the shade again. I stood behind, and then she says it, don't doubt my abilities at 278, to either you or to God. Adam at line 290 will, with healing words, say it one more time. Daughter of God and man, immortal Eve, for such thou art from sin and blame entire. No, he says, I don't want you to do this. The enemy, though bold, will hardly dare, or daring first on me the assault shall light. In other words, no. Right? And the domestic Adam, we're told at line 318, in his care and matrimonial love. But Eve will come back with an interesting response at 322. If this be our condition, thus to dwell in narrow circuit, straitened by a foe, subtle or violent, we not endued single with like difference wherever met, how are we happy still in fear of harm? In other words, Eve will say it. If this is our condition, then at line 326, she says it, Eden is no Eden, right? The idea here is that frail at line 340, frail is our happiness if this is so. In Eden, where no Eden thus exposed. Adam at line 342 has had enough. Oh, woman! Best of all things, as the will of God ordained thee, his creating hand, nothing imperfect or deficient left of all that he created, much less man or aught that might his happy state serene, secure from outward foe, from outward force. In other words, he will say it to her, you're starting to torque me off. Of course, we think of Hamlet's line in his first soliloquy, frailty, thy name is woman.